The Wild West, a time of gunfights, ruthless outlaws, lawmen who lived on the edge, and legends that have shaped the very identity of the American frontier. But was it truly a land of constant violence, where everything was settled by a fast draw at high noon? Was the West really as lawless and untamed as the movies and legends have portrayed? Or was the reality much more complex, filled with struggle, survival, and raw humanity? In this journey, we'll explore the true Wild West. We'll uncover the forgotten stories of men and women who fought for survival, from infamous outlaws to legendary lawmen, from the brutal life of the cowboy to the untold resistance of the Native American tribes. These are the untold histories that reveal the real Wild West. The myth of the Wild West begins not with cowboys and gunslingers, but with the struggle for land, survival, and cultural transformation that stretched from the 1820s to the 1860s. The US government's policy of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to expand westward, led to the forced relocation of Native American tribes and the systematic destruction of their way of life. As settlers moved into the Western territories, they faced opposition from indigenous nations who had lived on the land for thousands of years. The US Army waged brutal campaigns to secure the land for settlers, resulting in events like the Trail of Tears and the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which uprooted entire tribes from their ancestral lands. Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce. In 1877, Chief Joseph led his people on a 1,170-mile journey to escape the US Army, an attempt that ended in surrender just miles from the Canadian border. His famous words, "I will fight no more forever," became the epitome of tragic resistance. The discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in 1848 set off a migration of nearly 300,000 prospectors, gamblers, merchants, and thieves, all seeking wealth in California. This event led to the creation of Boomtowns, chaotic, often lawless towns that sprang up almost overnight. The mining camps were filled with greed and violence, and many towns had no government or legal system. One of the most infamous hideouts was Robber's Roost, a secluded canyon in Utah, used by Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It was here that the two outlaws would plan their robberies in complete isolation, evading capture for years. Butch Cassidy became a figure who blurred the line between criminal and folk hero. In Tombstone, another notorious town, the Clanton Gang had a well-known hideout. The infamous gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881 was the pinnacle of the violence that defined these lawless boomtowns. Women in the Wild West were not mere passive figures. They were central to the development of frontier society. While many were homemakers, others became pioneers, businesswomen, and even criminals. One such figure was Belle Starr, the Bandit Queen. She was a notorious outlaw who was involved in cattle rustling, horse theft, and the hiding of stolen goods. Despite her criminal activities, she maintained an air of defiance and lived by her own rules, much like the men around her. Jesse James, once a Confederate guerrilla, became the face of outlaw rebellion. Together with his brother Frank James and the infamous James Younger Gang, Jesse pulled off a series of high-profile robberies. These crimes became legendary, cementing Jesse's place in history as a folk hero in the eyes of many. However, in reality, he was a cold-blooded killer, and his gang wreaked havoc on the Midwest and South. One of Jesse's most famous moments came during the Northfield Bank robbery in 1876, when the James Younger Gang tried to rob a bank in Minnesota. The robbery went horribly wrong, resulting in a bloody shootout and the death of several gang members. Jesse's betrayal by his own gang member, Robert Ford, who shot him in the back in 1882, marked the end of the James family's reign of terror. One of the most famous outlaw hideouts was Hole in the Wall in Wyoming, where Butch Cassidy's wild bunch would regroup and plan their next big heist. This place was so remote and hidden that no lawman could find it. While outlaws dominated the popular imagination, the Wild West also had its fair share of lawmen, men and women who were as tough as any outlaw. Wyatt Earp, Bass Reeves, and Wild Bill Hickok were just a few of the legendary figures who brought justice to the frontier. Lawmen employed a variety of tactics to take down outlaws. Some relied on intelligence and covert operations. Bass Reeves, for example, was known for his use of disguises. He would often infiltrate criminal gangs by posing as a fellow outlaw, only to arrest them when they least expected it. Wyatt Earp was known for his ruthlessness in a gunfight, especially at the OK Corral, where he and his brothers faced off against the Clanton gang. The Cowboy Way of Life was not just about riding horses and wearing hats. It was about surviving the brutal conditions of the frontier. Cattle drives, which saw thousands of cattle moved from Texas to the railheads in Kansas, were grueling affairs that lasted for months. Cowboys faced harsh weather, treacherous terrain, and the constant threat of cattle rustlers. The long drive could last up to 3 months, with cowboys riding hundreds of miles over rough trails. Life on the cattle trail was difficult, often marked by extreme heat, heavy rain, and dangerous stampedes that could wipe out entire herds. Cowboys lived on dried beef, beans, and coffee, often battling exhaustion and isolation. Nat Love, known as Deadwood Dick, was born a slave in Tennessee, but rose to become one of the most famous black cowboys of the time. He wrote about his experiences in his autobiography, highlighting his feats in rodeos, cattle drives, and the dangerous situations he faced. His story epitomizes the perseverance required to thrive in such a harsh environment. Love won a roping contest in Deadwood and became one of the most celebrated cowboys in the West. The Cowboy Way of Life, although often romanticized as the epitome of rugged individualism, was deeply influenced by Native American cultures, particularly in their horsemanship. Mexican vaqueros, cowboys, brought with them essential cattle ranching techniques, and many of the early cowboys were of Mexican, Black, or Native American descent. In fact, a significant number of cowboys were African American, former slaves who worked the cattle drives and became legendary figures. The vaquero tradition shaped many aspects of cowboy culture, from the style of riding and roping to the clothing worn, such as the wide-brimmed hat and chaps. Native American tribes, especially those who had mastered horseback riding, such as the Comanche and Apache, also had a profound impact on cowboy culture. They contributed vital knowledge about survival, tracking, and horsemanship, which were crucial for cowboys in navigating the tough terrain. By the 1890s, the era of the Wild West as a living, breathing entity was coming to a close. The railroads and telegraph had connected the vast, isolated territories of the West, and the U.S. government continued to impose laws that limited the open range for cattle. With the end of the frontier came the end of many of the iconic symbols of the Wild West. But the spirit of the Wild West lived on through figures like Buffalo Bill Cody and his famous Wild West show. Cody, a former scout and buffalo hunter, transformed the history of the West into a commercial spectacle. His show featured reenactments of famous battles, trick riders, sharpshooters, and even Native American performers, such as Sitting Bull, who was brought into the show to add authenticity. While Cody's show was entertaining, it was also a tool of propaganda, shaping how the world saw the American frontier through a romanticized and sometimes inaccurate lens. Annie Oakley, known as Little Sure Shot, was one of the most famous sharpshooters to ever live. She starred in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, wowing audiences with her incredible shooting feats. One of her most famous stunts was shooting a cigarette from her husband's lips, an act that mesmerized crowds around the world. The legends of the Wild West came to an end one by one. Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and Wyatt Earp were all figures who became larger than life in history. As the West became more civilized with the arrival of the railroad and new settlements, the days of outlaws and frontier justice slowly faded away. Billy the Kid, for example, was shot and killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881 at the age of 21. The fact that he died so young and at the hands of lawmen cemented his place in folklore as a tragic figure. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid disappeared in Bolivia in 1908, where they were believed to have died in a final shootout. Their fate remains one of the great mysteries of the Wild West. But for figures like Wyatt Earp, the story didn't end with death. Earp lived on into his old age, surviving the days of the Wild West and eventually moving to Hollywood, where he became a consultant on Western films, turning his life into myth and legend. While the Wild West may have been tamed and its days long gone, its spirit lives on. The image of the lone cowboy, the standoff at high noon, the epic struggles between lawmen and outlaws, and the tales of daring and danger continue to resonate in pop culture through films, books, and video games. The Wild West shaped American identity. Its values of individualism, freedom, and rugged determination remain cornerstones of the nation's self-image. However, the true story of the Wild West is far more nuanced than the Hollywood version. It was a land of violence, survival, and heartbreak, where people of all races, backgrounds, and genders fought for their place in an unforgiving land. From the struggles of the Native Americans to the tales of cowboys, outlaws, and lawmen, the Wild West was a place of great personal stories, both tragic and triumphant. This was the Wild West, and this is its real story.